Hi, I'm Norman Perlo, a furniture designer maker at Perlo Design and a woodworking educator author at WoodSkills. When you're creating furniture, don't be afraid to mark the components extensively to avoid mistakes when cutting and creating joinery. It's very important, even if you remove the markings with a hand plane or you remove some wood and the marking is invisible again, use a pencil and recreate that marking because it's so important, so critical for both reference edges and to assemble the piece afterwards and have the components in the right orientation. So I tend to mark both the face and the back of the board and develop a marking system and use it at all times. So develop something you're comfortable with, you're familiar with, and there are different marking systems. There's a triangle marking system, for example. And it's not a problem to have too many pencil markings. They can all be erased prior to finishing or hand planed away at the final stage of finishing a surface with a smoother plane. So the marking system, develop a marking system you understand. And there are well-known marking systems. A triangle system comes to mind. So when you're assembling components together, the orientation and the face and the edges are all coming together correctly. That's very important. So when fitting parts together, reach for a chisel, a pair of waist livers that keep the joint from fitting. So first thing that comes to mind is a mortise and tenon joint, the fit. So this is actually a good fit, but had the tenon been a little too wide, and it was very difficult to insert. I could easily either use a block plane, a shoulder plane, or simply a wide chisel and just trim away a few thousandths of an inch of material of wood and achieve the same result as a block plane. So I use either chisels, block planes, or specialty planes, combination planes, or shoulder planes to perform that sort of thing. But if you haven't got these tools, you can easily just work it with the chisel. And another important point to make when you're using chisels is to keep them sharp. So develop a sharpening system that you're comfortable with, that you're familiar with, and you'll tend to want to sharpen your tools more often if you make it easier for yourself and understand that sharpening system. Keep a sharp set of chisels nearby, so you'll tend to use the hand tools more if they're conveniently located. I have a chisel stand at the other workbench, and I make these stands periodically for different sets of chisels. This is a detailed chisel set and strictly used for repairing. And so this stand, I can move from workbench to workbench, and I could easily access the chisels. I keep this in a tool welt when I'm working. I have a larger one for standard bevel edge chisels. So try to keep your tools convenient, like having a wall-mounted tool cabinet. It's a little fancy, but you don't really have to go to that length. So keep tools handy in racks and keep the edges of tools from touching each other, the steel, to avoid denting or compromising the sharpness of the tool. And that's another reason for keeping the chisels come to mind. I even have a little chisel rest here I use to keep the edge off the surface of your workbench, both, and keep them separate from each other. So I have 2 or 3 of these. So it's important just to keep tools away from each other, especially the edge of the tool. So going back to chisels, bevel edge chisels, which I tend to use, have either very narrow lands, which are best for dovetail work, or standard firmer chisels with standard lands. And what I mean by a land is this part right here. This is a standard thickness for a land. And this will work in most cases for the type of work, the average standard work. When you're creating tight joinery, and dovetail joinery comes to mind, and which I tend to use in my work considerably. For attaching drawer fronts to drawer sides, I use a set of chisels with extremely narrow lands. And the land, again, if you would notice, it's very, very fine. It's almost to the point where the bevel edge and the back of the chisel joint. So it's just enough to keep it from cutting your fingers or something, but this works well in a tight joint. Corners are because of the angle of the corner, you're not compressing any fibers in the corner. So that's the difference with bevel edge chisels, less expensive versus this is a very expensive set. I mean, it's expensive but not very expensive. These are conventional bevel edge chisels with a standard thickness of a land at the edge, and this is the bevel, and that's why they're called bevel edge chisels. And this is a smaller. Again, this has a very wide land. The best purchase you can make is a set of firmer chisels that I've just described. These sets similar to this, or there's another set that I've had. It's almost 25 years I have this set, but I've upgraded 2 or 3 times over the years. They're very inexpensive, and with a standard set, you'll have the standard measurements from about 1/4 inch up to 1 inch. A set of 4 or 5 or 6, and then later on you can purchase thinner ones if you're doing more detail work. Like this is a 1/8 of an inch. So I have a selection of these thinner ones. And again, I'll mention that the detail set, I happen to have this, but not something you really need. But this works well for the type of work I do. I do a lot of inlay work, so I tend to use these detailed chisels. They're very delicate and they're strictly for paring. You can actually create your own too. And we'll discuss layout squares. These are layout squares. These are a set of a couple of Japanese layout squares, and they're preset to either 45 degrees or 90 degrees. And they have a component that sits against, you place against an edge or an end of a board to be able to mark that in 45 or 90 degree angle. This one's strictly set to 45 degrees. So I'll give you an example if I'm marking. So I would actually apply this edge to the edge of the board and mark this off at 45 degrees. So it's a quick way to create 45 degree markings on a board. This one's, again, it's specifically set to 45 degrees for the most part, and this one has a 90 degree and a 45 degree component along with a ruler for scale. So I'm creating a cross hatch now. These are actually very inexpensive, purchased again through Lee Valley. They're a Chinois, it's a good brand. I have a Chinois, other tools from Chinois. So that's the advantage of using layout squares. And then you can also use engineer squares, metal engineer squares, to be able to perform the same function if you're working at 90 degrees. That's just something I tend to pick these up more often than not for 90 degrees. It's just, I have them everywhere on the workbenches. A set of large to small. I would actually highly recommend getting a set of these. And you can use other tools like a combination square. This is a small Starrett 6-inch. You can use this to perform the same function. As an engineer square, you can use this. So this is a reference face against the edge, and then mark the 90 degree mark. And the advantage of a combination square is that you can either set it for 90 degrees or 45 degrees. So by using the opposite face on the combination square, either the 4-inch, 6-inch, or 12-inch, whatever you have, you could set it to mark 45 degrees. Much like I've done with these layout squares, these Japanese layout squares. This is more of a Western style standard tool that you'll find almost every woodworker has, and if you just purchase one of these, you'll be fine. And these are more specific for specific angles, and they're engineered to be accurate. So a sliding, I think I touched on the sliding bevel gauge. The sliding bevel gauge is a little different. It transfers angles between components. So if you're transferring a preset angle from one board to another and you're not sure of the angle, you would use a sliding bevel gauge. And I have a couple here. There's one. This is, again, it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's a Shinwa. It's a Japanese brand. But this is an example of a sliding bevel gauge. So if I'm not sure, this is actually set to 45, but if I'm not sure of that angle, and I need to transfer the same angle to another board, I would use the sliding bevel gauge for introducing precision and accuracy, and mark that. So I've now established the angle on the sliding bevel gauge, this angle, and if I need to transfer it to another board, I would just set the bevel gauge against the edge of the board, and that would be the same angle as this, exactly the same angle. So this is ideal for angles that are not 45 or not 90 degrees or any arbitrary angle. This is a sliding bevel gauge. I highly recommend getting yourself one. This is pretty expensive. It's under $50, this particular one. They come in, this is more of a, again, it's a Japanese version, but this is a more Western version here. That's a sliding bevel gauge. So all these tools, the concept is that they introduce precision in your work, so there's less margin for error. You could also use a protractor to do the same thing. This is a widely available, inexpensive tool. So this would allow you to transfer the angle from one board to another, but you can also determine what the angle is. So in this case, again, it's 45 degrees, so it's exactly 45 degrees. So I could either transfer this angle to another board, 45 degrees, or check multiple boards to ensure that they're all 45 degrees. Is the advantage of a protractor. You can either measure an angle and transfer it, or just transfer between components. So something you should invest in. This is a little more expensive. One has a thicker gauge steel. Definitely recommend getting a good one if you're going to get one, because to purchase one, it's well worth the investment. You'll have it for life, as with most hand tools. So in this image, I'm showing you various measuring and marking tools used in my day-to-day furniture making. You can see some of the tools I created that I mentioned earlier. The stop rule, the small squares. I forgot to mention the double square. It's another. I'll just discuss that shortly. And small planes, hand planes, along with the sliding bevel gauge. So this is another tool I tend to use quite a bit in my work. It's a double square. So this not only serves as a square, but it also allows you to measure offsets from edges or ends of boards. Transfer that measurement to another board. I can measure the depth of a board. I can measure the depth, so I can measure the height of this and transfer this to another. Just lock it in and transfer this measurement to another board. I'll just get something thick and then not quite this one, but so I could transfer this measurement, and this is the exact depth or the height of this board. That's the advantage of a double square. Again, it's not very expensive, and I wouldn't look at the price so much of these tools when you're purchasing them, because they're tools that if you buy a quality version of these tools, you're purchasing it once. Most of the tools you see I've had for a number of years, and some I've had for over 2 decades. So it's well worth the investment. Unlike any other mass-produced power tool that becomes obsolete when a newer version comes out or something, the modifications and upgrades to these tools are very few and far between, almost non-existent. So these very same tools have been in existence for decades, or if not a century. Especially this combination square, this concept or this layout has been available for 100, 150 years. Another tool is a tri-square. I tend to use tri-squares for larger panel work. There's an idea of it. This is one of the tri-squares I used to market, but this is, again, it's for larger components, so I would use a tri-square, and it's perfectly calibrated to ensure 90 degrees perpendicular from the face or an edge. So this is a larger tool than the metal squares, and I think they actually get quite a bit larger even. This is another larger version. So please subscribe to my YouTube woodworking channel, where I share more of my woodworking techniques, my woodworking philosophy, my thoughts on woodworking, and all the challenges I've experienced, and I introduce some of the new forms of woodworking I've discovered. And also visit woodskills.com, where I have a good selection of my books, both in print and digital format, on woodworking, and all my online courses, and I also offer some woodworking plans. I have maintained a regular blog on what I've got going on in my workshop and in woodworking in general. So enjoy.